So what I'm going to cover in the next half an hour, hopefully 25 minutes, leave some time for questions, is what a dedicated HR payroll solution can do for a multi-academy trust. In contrast to the kind of current landscape, which is you've got some people data in your MIS system, you've got some people data in your budgeting system, you've got a few spreadsheets with some more people data. It's a bit of a challenge to get hold of that at trust level. So that's going to be the thrust of the talk. I'm from Pierce Financials, and we provide fully integrated solutions to education space. We've got about 3,500 customers in total. 45% of all academies use Pierce Financial solutions, and particularly 70% of the large multi-academy trusts. So we got into the sector 10 years ago with school groups, and we've used that experience to kind of be where we are now. We're not just used in education, so we do have a number of customers outside of the education space that use us also. And there's a global element to what we do as well, so we're in use across 58 countries worldwide. So I'm just going to start off with a few questions for you guys, a bit of audience participation. It's still fairly early. All right, we want some energy in the session today. About some people, and I want you to put your hand up if you could, not off the top of your head, but answer these questions when you go back to the ranch. And be confident in your answer with an accuracy of about 5%. Okay, I'll give you a 5% variance that you can get within. So if you're confident you could give me the answer to these when you get back to the ranch, please put your hand up. So first of all, really easy one. Who knows head count, how many employees are in your mat? Okay, good. About 20% of you know how many people are employed by your mat. How many members of your staff are within 2 years of retirement? And that is statutory, not wishing to retire. That is actual per age and regulations, who's within 2 years of retirement and understands that staff succession planning piece. Okay, we got some two hands. We got two very proud people at the back saying, yeah, we know that. How many vacancies, and this is a bit of a tricky one this time of year, how many vacancies is your trust recruiting for across the board? Who would be able to reasonably assess that? Okay, pretty low. And this obviously doesn't happen, but has anybody in your mat in the last 12 months missed a probationary review meeting? Yeah, probably. I don't want you to put your hand up if it's a yes, okay? And lastly, should be all very fresh in your minds, who fully understands the gender pay gap score for your trust? Yeah, by memory, I imagine. It's imprinted in your brain at the moment. So then I want to start the session with those, to start the brain thinking about what MIS and HR systems should be doing for your multi-academy trust. And there is a very good reason that HR systems are called HR information systems, okay? The primary role of an HR payroll system within a multi-academy trust is to give you information on your people, which represent 80% of your costs. So kind of step one, let's get that data centralized, let's get visibility of the people data across the trust. Moving that forwards a little bit, I hate the term personally, one version of the truth, but I'm going to use it anyway because it works. But the ability for you to have one place within your trust that is your go-to place for staff data. For those of you lucky enough to go through some audits, I'm sure you all have fun and games preparing the audit file, all those payroll reconciliations and all of that joys, collecting that data from all over the piece. Your HR database should be that single source of truth and reliable staff database for the entire trust. And beyond the core details, so at the moment it would be pretty, I'm sure a number of you would be pretty pleased to just get overall headcount details, names, number of people and kind of overall contract information. But if we think what else could be included within an HR system, information on appraisals, right to work, gender, ethnicity, how we can start really gaining data on a number of those factors is something as well that you'd expect from a tool. And what that gives you is then the ability to actually start managing your people. Okay, so people are not managed that well, certainly from a system-wise. They are very well from an individual and a personnel-wise, but actually the system is not allowing you to manage your people. And by getting control of a number of those things, it will allow you to do that. And then lastly, the easy bit is use that data to actually make better decisions and make decisions based upon data rather than judgment and kind of best estimates. So in terms of other areas that an HR system can do beyond learning how many people you've got in your group, What else do HR systems give you the ability to do? And the first one on that list is the biggest factor that makes a change happen across your organisation, which is a self-service portal. What a self-service portal is the ability for all of your employees to interact directly with your HR system, which naturally then means you're removing all manual processes, you're removing all paper forms. Any manual interaction is removed because any interaction between HR and employees can all be done via the self-service portal directly. It should handle your recruitment process, end-to-end recruitment, starting from a vacancy request to say, okay, I wish to recruit somebody, moving through to the relevant authorizations at local level and trust level, but then right the way through to the candidate registration. So candidates can then apply electronically, those details are captured electronically, all fed through. You can decide yes, no, or maybe to all of those candidates. It will automate the communications on who's made it through to interviews, who hasn't. But the whole point of that recruitment process is controlling that process to the point where you then appoint somebody with a touch of a button. And that data is already there because the job vacancy had all the role information and the candidate's electronic application had all the personal information. So that appointment process, and I think probably one of the biggest frustrations in schools, is the fact that when a new starter starts, you guys or guys within school offices have to add that same data into so many different systems. You know, that process is transformed if we're able to standardise that with a recruitment package. Staff development, and this is in a number of different forms, so I know there's lots of tools out there that do kind of CPD and appraisals, so there's lots out there. And there is a bit of a mixture in the landscape in terms of what schools are doing what, but the ability for one system to be your standard source of entry for that appraisal process, whether that's teachers, whether that's support staff, but equally to then standardise what the appraisal process should look like across your schools, is something that's very important within a map. Accident reporting, it's a bit of an anti-climax when I get to this one. It allows you to report on accidents, okay? I think there is some strong health and safety laws around it, but as an accountant, that doesn't excite me as much, but some of you guys might get excited by health and safety. And then lastly, the biggest reason schools are underserved by HR software is because of the requirement to produce a workforce census. And that one requirement, or that statutory requirement around a workforce census, means people are having at the moment to hold staff information in their MIS system because it has to do that for the statutory return. And that's really distorted the picture. Whereas if an HR system, an HR payroll system, was able to complete that workforce census for you, you can really start to reevaluate why you've got staff data in your MIS system at all. So at a secondary school, there's obviously requirements around timetable and cover and that lesson planning piece. But in a primary school context, other than kind of registrations and assigning classes, do you need staff data in your MIS system if you've taken that workforce census requirement out? Just a question to perhaps think of. And then in a map scenario, I've not trademarked this one yet, but we're going for the single central record. So the ability across a multi-academy trust to have one single central record that, yes, you can divvy down into each school for Ofsted, but at trust level you can have a trust-wide process and trust-wide controls to make sure that single central record is up to date. So I'm just going to dig in a bit more detail on some of those points now, just so we can see how those translate. First of all is the self-service portal. So this is a picture of ours. So first of all, you can start off with personal details, changing addresses, changing phone numbers, changing next of kin details, changing emergency contact details. All of that can be done automatically by the employee in the self-service portal. Payroll, anyone updates their bank details, they do that directly in the self-service portal. No forms, no speaking to payroll, that's just a simple change that's auditable, but that change is made directly. Copy pay slips. Anybody that remortgages generally has to get copies of their pay slips, and if they're anything like me, they've lost them, and they are badgering you guys for copies of historic pay slips. A self-service portal gives people the ability to email themselves historic pay slips, P60s and P11Ds if those are applicable. Annual leave. For those people lucky enough to have annual holiday, or not, because that means they're generally term time. I don't know if it's lucky or not. But should there be a holiday process within the trust, that whole holiday and annual leave request process can be handled via the self-service portal. Sickness. I don't know what the current process is for sickness within your schools. In theory, somebody could be lying in bed and say, I'm off sick this morning. Generally, people will put processes in places so they've at least got to speak to a scary line manager or a cover supervisor, but whatever the trigger point for that sickness is, the entry point for that record is the self-service portal, and that data can then filter through to anywhere else. Absences, thinking about other absence types, bereavement leave, time off in lieu, training leave, all of those other absence types are also handled and managed electronically and automated within a self-service portal. Overtime claims, who would love to get rid of overtime claim forms? You could do that, okay? So overtime claims can be put directly in here and then the workflow can handle that. Data protection, GDPR, I'm not going to say I'm an expert, I don't know a lot about it, but in terms of that permission piece and people understanding what data you hold about them, you can surface all of that via the self-service portal and ensure you get that agreement to, or acceptance to hold that detail. And then at the bottom, you can see a number of sections there for My Team. So this is accessible by all employees, and all employees can potentially update their own details, but for line managers, they can also then perform actions for their team members. So for a line manager, they can then authorize people's holiday requests, authorize leave requests, authorize overtime claims. Should your policy be after 3 days off sick, there's a return to work interview. That return to work interview is done directly into the self-service portal. Equally, if there's a self-certification required, if they've been off for less than 3 days, that is also done in the self-service portal. Overtime and then the CPD and appraisal process, that annual or quarterly or whatever your appraisal process might be, is done in the self-service portal. So for an employee, the fact that we can hold policies in here and then hold acknowledgements that people have read and understood policies, this can be the one-stop shop for employees in their interactions with your organisations. So the ability to enter data directly is one thing, but I imagine a lot of you are control freaks and you don't want any data going into your HR system unless you say that's okay, which I get. And paper forms and manual processes give you the ability to add your own slant or put whatever you want from the result of that. So, entering the data in the form is one thing, but actually how that then gets into your system is completely up to you. So some examples on the different routes that some of these changes could take. Firstly, overtime claim, that's pretty clear. You're not going to want people to do overtime claims that go straight into the payroll. I'm sure it'd be quite attractive for employees, but you're going to want some control on that process. So that's going to go through an approval process. And that can be single level, multi-level, depending on line managers, depending on if they're working on projects. Secondly, change of address. Somebody's updated their address. Do you really want to approve somebody changing their address? You might have a reason for that. You might have a process where you need to do that. Or you might just want an alert. You might want an alert to say they've changed an address so you can send them a congratulations on your new home card. You could also automate that in the workflow, but I just thought of that on the spot actually. I'm going to use that one again. But it also could be, okay, if somebody's changed address 3 times in 6 months, that means, what's going on? Do we need to have a chat? Let's notify HR that this has happened. So you've got all of those options about what kind of happened when data is put into the self-service portal. And lastly, bereavement leave request. Is that an alert? Is that an authorization? You guys know the process that you have in-house, and that will be translated automatically. So you can allow employees to initiate all of these processes, which means you're cutting down your work hugely because they're doing the work, they're filling out the form. Secondly, you're in full control of what happens when any changes are made. But another big part of HR's job is to be really boring and chase people. Chase, chase, chase. Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? So another big plus of an automated HR system is the fact that the workflow tool, whilst it can be used for authorizations and notifications, it can also be used for polite reminders, okay? And you can politely remind people that certain tasks are due. So some of those examples are probation review meetings. These get missed everywhere. I'm a trustee at a small mat. I know this happens everywhere, but you can start that process off a month in advance. Okay, this person's probation review is up in a month. 2 weeks time, this is now 2 weeks, so you're doing it. A week's time, you can copy in the line manager and the line manager. That process can be done automatically, so you guys don't have to chase it. It will just get done. Return to work interviews. I'm sure all of your policies require a return to work interview if somebody's been off for a certain period of time. Are you confident they're being done? And do you have time to chase all the ones that haven't been done? Probably not. a standardized reminder system that has escalation built in is something that can be done here. Right to work documentation, whether that's work permits, whether that's passports, any of that can be put on an automated reminder. Business use car insurance, does anybody request evidence that people have got business use cover on their car insurance policy? We do, and the only reason I've got that is our HR system in PSF constantly reminds me when I've renewed it actually reminds me to renew my insurance, because it's telling me your insurance is about to expire, we need an updated copy, and I can then act on that. And lastly, appraisals. By putting these automated reminders on, it gives more chance that these processes are going to be followed. I'd love to say it guarantees that processes are going to be followed and tasks taking place on time, but worst case, it's going to at least mean that they've been reminded a good number of times, and if they've chose to ignore those reminders, then that's a different story. Recruitment. I mentioned end-to-end recruitment and what the standardized recruitment module can do. Firstly, it's standardize the process. If you've got 5 schools, 10 schools, 20 schools in your multi-academy trust, you want to make sure that that recruitment process is as standardized as possible. It's not going to be this, you're not going to be able to mirror that process across the board, but it's quite scary actually how in many cases there is no standardization on that recruitment process. And even scarier that internal audit isn't picking this up. I've been to many trusts where there's 2 signatures required on a bottle of milk and a packet of biscuits out of the petty cash tin, but there's no authorization required on a potential 50 grand a year commitment on staff. That is frightening, it happens, but we're starting to see that potentially change. It will automate the communications process to make sure that everybody gets updated. I know it can be difficult to respond to all candidates to say, not successful or successful. The system can do that for you. You can ensure fair recruitment. So when you're looking at things around gender, any disability, ethnicity, you can capture all of that information at the candidate capture stage, but you can choose to hide that from the recruitment process. So you can report on it for your kind of fair recruitment reporting, but you can hide that from the recruiter if you wish. And lastly, across a trust, by standardizing that process means you have visibility. For those of you about to do the now 3-year budget submission in June, July, I'm not expecting people to put their hands up, but I've seen people submit budgets to the EFA in June, July, September comes and a load of new people start. And you think, oh, where did you come from? I didn't have visibility of that recruitment. So, at worst case, a standardizing recruitment just gives that full visibility, so you're not going to be caught out by any recruitment processes ongoing that you in finance or HR might not know about. And that onboarding process can be completely automated. That's what it can look like. So it will embed directly onto your website. You can apply directly, or you can't, but you could. But candidates register electronically and apply. We're seeing more and more trusts now in-housing payroll. It's something that as a school, it's always been outsourced to local authority, don't want the aggro, don't want the experience. If I get hit by a bus, who's going to get paid? And I've got some sympathy with that scenario in a standalone school or in a smaller trust. But we're seeing a real trend now of people starting to bring that payroll piece in-house. One is around cost. The cost per pay slip as a growing mat with 1,000 employees is huge. You're looking at a 50 grand a year cost just for an outsourced payroll service. And secondly is around control. So it costs you a lot of money, you have very little control on the process, you have to kind of fall in line with whatever the process that the payroll provider gives. And there is another option, and I completely get this still terrifies people. And I'm not expecting me to take that fear away, but just maybe plant a seed about, okay, actually you could bring this in-house without so much grief. So the payroll, I'm going to compare current payroll process or outsourced payroll to in-house payroll with an integrated HR payroll system. I'm going to start the process off with the data that you guys have to collect in advance of giving it to the payroll people, and whether that's overtime claims, whether that's contract changes, expense claims, whatever they might be, there is a whole piece of work that you guys do middle of the month generally in collating data ready to give to your payroll people. You then give that data to the payroll people. There is a line there for a reason, because that's a touch point. That is an area where things can go wrong. Data that you're giving to somebody else, there's potential for error. They're then doing something with it, and then they then put it into their finance system. there's another line there because there's another touch point for a potential error. You've given it to them, but actually they could potentially make an error in then what they do with it in their finance system, payroll system, and the system does the calculation. So the payroll provider is doing the work, they're feeding the data into the payroll system, they're not doing the payroll calculation, they've got a system that does that for them. And then finally, there is a process where you check probably every single line on your payroll, because either they're unable to give you exception reports, or you have lost all trust in the provider. You have to go line by line and check every single thing. So that is a very elegant picture of your outsourced payroll provision. And I just want to translate that, how that would really change if you were to bring that, or think about bringing that in-house. First of all, there is no big exercise in collating all of the data for payroll, because that HR administration piece is just happening all the time. Whenever there's an overtime claim, whenever there's a contract change, that's happening within the self-service portal. It's being approved or rejected, so that process is happening, you're not doing any extra work. And all of those changes that happen throughout the month then feed right the way through into the payroll. And an integrated HR payroll system means you're not duplicating any of those work. I've still got lines on the diagram, which is an error. I should have took those lines away, because there is no transfer of data. The data is going in the self-service portal, it's being checked, it's being approved, but that is then the data that's being used to drive the payroll. And then lastly, you can check the data. So the process, you're still not doing the payroll piece. And I think that's one bit of fear that people have, I don't really know how to do payroll. You don't need to understand it. You need to understand how to spot data and see if there's a problem, which, given I imagine most of your experiences with your payroll provider, you're pretty good at that. You've got a pretty good understanding of payroll, but you don't need to understand that calculation piece, because the system does that. It takes all of the changes and all the payroll processes, it takes a gross calculation and takes it to net and puts the payaways into the relevant areas. But at least with a proper HR payroll system, other systems are available. I'm not completely biased, I am slightly, but others are available. That reporting piece is then focused on reporting by exception. So you will not have to check every single line. You move your control process upstream. So you put your control in that self-service portal piece, making sure the authorizations are right, and that's your check. And if the data's right at that point, you know it's going to be right, and you know it's going to feed through the payroll without any issues. And if you're not sure, that automated workflow process will do those exception checks for you. So things like somebody is their pension status is they've opted out of the pension because they're ineligible due to age, but they're 24. Those types of things, those exception checks we have running all the time in the background to flag up to you any potential errors. So those are a load of detail on kind of some specifics and HR, self-service, payroll and recruitment. I just want to kind of summarize this and what all of these things together, the impact that this would then have on your organization, and take your HR processes from a caterpillar to a beautiful flying butterfly. Okay, did I deliver that with conviction? First of all, step one, eliminate manual forms and processes. Okay, they are a thing of the past. Step two, you can gain comfort that as a trust, you've decided policies as a trust, and you've got comfort that they're being followed by all schools because the system is leading people to do that. Similar message, but you've got consistency. You know that all of your schools are doing things in the same way because they're using the same system that enforces things to work in a certain way. So you get comfort around consistency. And the byproduct of all of those is you reduce errors. I'd love to say you'll eliminate errors. It's not necessarily going to happen, but at worst case, you're going to eliminate a lot of errors and a lot of problems that you get with your HR system. I've got 2 minutes to go before I open up for questions, and I just want to show some of the data. So the questions I asked at the very beginning, if you can standardize and centralize all of your HR data, the types of analytics you can then start doing after that. So first of all, visibility of your recruitment process. This is a vacancy dashboard, and you can see all of your current vacancies, how many are filled, how many aren't. The box top left, can anybody see that, the writing? No, so I can say whatever I want about that. Excellent. This is what that box in the top left is saying is how many vacancies are within X days of their closing date, and you can define what X days is. and how many candidates have applied for each one. So you can really start to manage your vacancy piece and see, okay, we need to put some extra exposure on these. Secondly, absences. Accountants in the room will love this. It tells you always who is always off on a Monday, who is always off on a Friday. We can also tell you who's always off the week before the end of term. And bottom right there is employees repetitively absent on the same day for more than 2 years. So this is wives' birthdays, husbands' birthdays. You probably wouldn't see this if you don't have the data, but the ability to see who's potentially doing that is interesting. Succession planning, the ability to look across your trust and see who is approaching retirement age and actually where they are geographically. And we can even couple that in with things like who's got relevant head teacher qualifications. I'm sure still very fresh in your minds, gender pay gaps. Gender pay gap reporting will come straight out of the box, giving you those 8 reportable areas. But the nice thing is once you've captured that data, I'm sure a lot of you went through a pretty manual process to collate that gender pay gap information for the recent submission. But by having it available in granular detail, you can then start to tell the story. So having the data underneath, you can then give narrative to explain your gender pay gap and explain whether that is a particular age group, a particular job role, particular schools, where that overall gender pay gap figure, how that is made up. And those are some of the analytics things that you can start to look at when you centralise your HR payroll data. You'll be pleased, well you might be pleased, you might not be pleased to know, that is me done. Okay, in which case, thank you very much guys. Feel free to come and see us. We've got plenty of information on the stand if you want to have a closer look, and also I'll be around for questions. Thank you.